With just weeks to go until millions of children are due to go back in the classroom for the first time in months, the government's been warned that there may be a trade-off to allow schools to reopen.
Yes, England's chief medical officer said we're near the limit of opening up society, so near the limit of what we can release post-lockdown. So could this mean that pubs will be forced to close so pupils can go back to school? We're joined now by Jonathan Downey, owner of the Milk and Honey Bar in Hackney in London. We could also speak to Genevieve Bent, who is head of science at a secondary school, and Chair of Public Health at Edinburgh University, Professor Linda Bold, also joins us. Let's come to you first of all, Genevieve. What do you feel is the risk of keeping pubs open if schools are going to go back in September?
So I think, I think that, you know, there's so much risk involved with reopening schools in September. I think as a teaching community, we have had a lot of concerns with bringing students back to school, having a full reopening. You know, they are one of the most important mass gatherings in the country. And so, you know, there are parents who are possibly going to be frequenting pubs, who may possibly be exposed to risk to the exposure of COVID-19, and that possible transmission is a real concern for a lot of us educators. Speaking, you know, directly from my point of view, from the point of view of my team and my colleagues, there are real concerns as to how this could actually affect, you know, teachers and the students that we are teaching each day. And so, I mean, we're completely empathetic to, you know, pub owners, landlords who have a real risk of, you know, having a negative impact and detrimental impact on what their livelihood is. But I think as education being our main priority, there needs to be real consideration as to the risk involved in, you know, transmission within schools from September onwards.
Jonathan, let's come to you because, of course, your business thrives on people coming through the door. You've not been able to get them through the door for such a long time. Lockdown got lifted and then suddenly you're allowing them back in. And here we are in a situation where the government is suggesting, or the theory is that actually at some point the compromise in order to get the kids back to school could be that bars and pubs have to close. What was your initial reaction when you heard that?
Well, I don't know why it needs to be an either or. I mean, obviously, health and education are priorities compared to going out to the pub. But community and the economy are important too. And without pubs, clubs, bars, restaurants and other businesses open and generating tax receipts, you know, there won't be any schools and there won't be proper funding for the NHS. And so it's really important that we keep our economy going. Pubs and bars, restaurants are some of the safest and most sanitary spaces in our country. We've been training our staff better than NASA astronauts over the last few weeks to be prepared to deal with COVID-19 issues. And I don't see that this is an either-or question. The question is, do we want to...
One of the problems, Jonathan, that you're training your staff, and a lot of bars are trying to be responsible as they possibly can to train their staff in a way to cope with COVID-19. But we have seen a couple of pubs, particularly at the heart of local outbreaks, pubs in Sunderland, some in Aberdeen as well, where somebody has gone to the pub and then has infected a few more people because the person in Aberdeen was waiting for the results of their COVID test, thinking that they were going to be negative, and they weren't. And the issue is, as well, and we've seen it, and I've been out and about, I've not been to pubs, but after people have had a few drinks, it gets harder and harder to properly social distance.
I think, well, there has been a focus on incidents like that, but they are rare and they are outliers. That is not the norm. That is not what we're seeing. We're seeing very carefully managed businesses across the country, and that will continue if we're allowed to stay open. We have to stay open. We have to keep going. We can't keep locking down. The local authorities have got wide-ranging powers to take steps and action where pub owners or pub managers are not operating within the guidelines. And those rules already exist. And I just think we need to allow our businesses to keep going. Hospitality, 4.5 million people in this country rely on hospitality for their job. That's 15% of the workforce. You know, we're gonna be locking down lives and livelihoods forever if we're not careful. And at some stage, we've just got to accept that pubs aren't dangerous spaces. They are well managed. We've got to keep them open. We generated £140 billion of revenue last year for the UK economy. That's vital for schools. That's vital for hospitals and everything else that makes our country what it is. We can't keep shutting things down on an arbitrary, occasional basis like this. We just can't keep going like that.
Well, Professor Ball, let's talk to you, Chair of Public Health at Edinburgh University. I guess you have a sense of both sides of this argument. There's none more than students that like a drink, is there, or going to the pub, but also you want to preserve education as a priority. You can see why people are getting confused, can't you? You know, Boris Johnson says, everyone get back to work. Rishi Sunak says, here's £10 if you want to eat out. Eating out helps out and helps out the community. And our economy. And yet, meanwhile, there are concerns from educators that actually there's too much of a risk if you've got schools going back in September and also people congregating in the colder months in pubs.
Absolutely, Kate. And Jonathan's made a really good point that health and the economy are interlinked. And nobody wants businesses that have just reopened. In fact, only today pubs are able to open indoors in Wales to close again. It's a situation we have to avoid. But I think we are in a place that we didn't need to be. We have about 4,900 cases of COVID, and the ONS estimates circulating in England every day. That's up significantly from a couple of weeks ago. So I think that we have opened up things at a stage where we still have a lot of virus circulating in the community. And that's why we're seeing these local lockdowns. We should have been in a better place by now. But what we need to do is try and restrict networks, try and restrict people meeting, particularly indoors. And that's why I think there has been this attention on, should we try and think about more sensible restrictions? So it's not just blanket lockdowns, but try and target communities, which is what's happening now, but potentially sectors. And I think everybody would agree that here in Scotland, kids have not been in school since March the 21st. None of our children went back. So I think we would all agree we should prioritise education. But my approach would be that I think we really need to focus over the next few weeks about getting case numbers down everywhere, because looking ahead, we certainly don't want businesses to have to close again, and we don't want schools to have to close again, because the disruption to education, these children are the taxpayers of the future. And research has shown that even temporary disruptions to education can have a big impact on their future life chances.
Genevieve, have you been to the pub since the summer holiday started and you weren't homeschooling?
I haven't.
And is that because you've been nervous about going out? You've been nervous about going and going about your business like you used to?
For me, actually, yeah, I believe that lockdowns had, an effect on how I see socialising and moving forward. And I do have a concern about social distancing. We've seen images of social distancing being non-existent. And so it's just been a concern, particularly with us going back in September. We want to be fit and healthy. We have really missed school. We want our children back as soon as possible and as safe as possible. And I don't believe that, it has to be an either or situation necessarily. But if we are thinking about education being the main priority, then actions speak louder than words. And there really needs to be some thought about how we can actually reopen to all students in the safest way possible. Students, our school has been particularly great in following the guidance and ensuring that it is safe for staff and students. We can't wait to get our students back. The social interaction has been missed for staff and children. But yeah, it has been a concern for a lot of educators, particularly those who have been shielding and those who may be vulnerable. So, there needs to be a lot of thought from my point of view.
Would it help if, for instance, rather than closing all pubs, which Jonathan might appreciate not doing, there was an argument for parents of children at school not to go to the pub, or teachers that were concerned not to go to the pub? Why does it make a difference, do you think, to close them completely?
Again, it's really difficult to say pubs close so schools can open, and that sort of argument everyone's going to have an opinion on it. I do agree that parents would be completely behind not going to the pub for the sake of having their children back in school. Parents are relying for the schools to reopen so that they can send their children back to school in September, so that they can go back and work. And so I do think that allowing or not allowing those parents or those parents choosing not to go back to pubs would be a really simple decision in a lot of the minds of parents and teachers. And I think that's just one choice that we'd have to make if it came down to it.
Jonathan, we've been running a poll on our website about this, whether our viewers believe that pubs should close in order for schools to open. As things stand, we're just going to have a look at it. 66% saying yes, they should. Before we came on air, we'd had about 28,000 people have voted on this. I think it's 29,000 people have voted. What can you say to reassure that 66% that think they should close, that actually keeping the pubs open, keeping bars open, doesn't necessarily have to be, is something that they will be able to stay safe, and it won't mean that their kids can't go back to school?
Well, I think if you'd asked me that question, I'd vote for schools too, but I don't think that's the choice that we need to be given here. The choice is, if we want schools, then we need businesses open. We need our economy going. As I said earlier, I think pubs, bars and restaurants are some of the safest, most sanitary spaces in the UK at the moment. We've got highly trained teams of people who really care passionately about looking after people. Hospitality workers are not frontline like NHS and care home workers, but, you know, we are in the business of looking after people. That's what we do for a living. And I just think, you know, come to the pub if you feel comfortable. If you don't, please stay home. We now know a lot more about this virus, who is susceptible, who the most vulnerable elements of society are, and we need to take care of those people more than ever now in care homes, etc., and people who are older and with pre-existing conditions. And I just think if you're in the younger category and you're healthy and you're not spending time around susceptible or vulnerable people, then pubs are safe places to come to. And I think, you know, I hope that continues to be the case.
Well, I think we all hope that they continue to be safe, don't we? And we hope that, you know, the isolated incidents are that isolated incidents. How do you, just very quickly, if it's cold and it's a packed pub, how do you social distance? I just can't see it really happening. People will want to chat and they'll end up being too close, won't they?
Well, you have to limit capacity. I mean, most premises, almost every premise has a licensed capacity. So my venue one of my venues in East London is 1,000 capacity. We've reduced the capacity there to 600. So 60% of what
people go to the pub on their own? Are they going to stand there 2 metres from anybody else? Do you see what I mean? It feels like the culture of a pub is about going and chatting. And I just...
Yeah, but if those places are sanitised on a regular basis, if everybody's hand sanitising when they come in, then, you know, you're never going to reduce the risk completely.
No.
Unless everybody stays in their home forever. So there has to be an element of freedom of choice, of movement, of interaction and contact. And we just need to try and create as many barriers to infection as we can. And we're doing that. We've been doing that since July the 4th, and we will continue doing it as long as is necessary.
And Linda, last word from you on this?
Well, I think everybody just needs to think about their behaviour. You know, I said about networks earlier. So every choice we make, if we're prioritising kids going back to school, then if people do choose to access hospitality, which of course we all enjoy, be responsible, follow the guidance and try and support the staff working in those settings to make sure that we keep everybody, you know, out of a risky environment or out of contact that doesn't need to happen. That would be my message, I think, to all of us.
OK, well, thank you all for joining us this morning. Jonathan, Genevieve and Linda, it's good to have you.